specific neighborhoods and certain places would be beneficial as well.
Also, they can support each other, the coordinators.
Absolutely.
We were thinking it'd be nice, maybe maybe three other.
Sure.
More the merrier.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of my spiel, so I'm going to turn it over to Maria.
Thank you. Good evening, and I want to thank you, Jackie and DeGay, for inviting me. It's kind of a marathon week, so I told Gay if I'm a little more silly than I normally am, because we're all pretty busy in a lot of meetings right now. Department of Neighborhood Environmental Programs has sort of two main sections. One is the environmental component, and one is the code enforcement component. We investigate every complaint that we receive, every one. We also issue all the city's permits and licenses. We do about 400 to 500 permits a month. This summer, even while we were opening the market house, we opened more businesses than people that have been there for 20 years remember us opening it at one time. So our normal is, 10 to 20. We were opening, a little more than 20 a month, so it's pretty big for us. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you can let us know things that aren't necessarily law enforcement, but are more property-related issues, property maintenance, things like street lights out, things like that. There are things that are safety-related that aren't necessarily criminal. The city right now has a program that you can access on the front page of the city's website called Report It. And has anybody ever used that?
I have it.
You have? And if you haven't, I've left a sheet over there that shows you how to access it. It's pretty easy. You do go back onto the system to check the status of any complaint that you put in. The other option that you have is just email me. And my card is up there. You can do it either way, or you can do both. I like to make sure folks know that our compliance isn't as instantaneous. I do have a badge, and everybody goes, uh-oh, Maria's getting the badge out if it's that bad. But we do have a process. So when we are able to get compliance right away on a property issue, we're all very happy about that. And that's most of the cases. In some cases, we have to actually issue a notice of violation. The code says we have to give folks a little time to comply. If they don't comply, then we can issue a citation with a fine. If it's something particularly egregious, I can skip the notice of violation. Then if it reaches to the step where they get a citation with a fine, then the longer step of it is get something scheduled for a court date. So there is a process. I would say 80% of the things that we do, or maybe even 90 if they're code issues, people deal with them right away. The kinds of things that we look at are anything from overgrown grass, abandoned structures. I know there was one that Dick was just talking to me about. Overgrown grass, when we get to the point where we're not getting compliance, could be a foreclosure property. We will have the grass mowed and put a lien on that property. Typically, properties don't get to a state of disrepair overnight. We've been able to whittle down the list of ones that clearly were in bad shape. I mean, our biggest goal is to get somebody back in grandma's house, if that's what can possibly happen, if there's still a relative there. Sometimes they take a little longer. I tell folks, and make sure you have a will. The properties that we deal with that are abandoned properties are properties that didn't have a will, and when they get to the point of being abandoned structures that we have to deal with them, they sometimes have 27 heirs. And it's really difficult to get a property into compliance once it's gone on that far. So a couple of highlights I wanted to mention to you. Streetlights, obviously a safety issue. Tree pruning around the streetlights can be a safety issue as well. Use the Report It system. The city does have a budget somewhat limited for tree pruning. If the trees are our trees, meaning they belong to the city, we will prune them. If they are trees that belong to the property owner, we will work with the property owner to get the property owner to prune them. If the property owner is just not in a place to be able to do that, then we can set up an agreement where the city would prune them, but they would have a lien so that they would eventually have to pay that money back. Or we can do some kind of agreement if we need to do that. We have a number of trees in the city that aren't an immediate safety danger, but they're going to be over time, and they're Bradford pears. There are a lot of them in the city. They were a really wonderful thing to plant in the 70s, and they're found unfortunately to be really weak trees, and they split, just like when you put flowers in a vase. And when the snow loads get on, then they're getting to the point where they're really outgrowing their useful life. We're going to start, using what money we have in fee and lieu money to start replacing the ones that belong to us, and to make some provisions to make it easier for folks to get permits to replace the ones that belong to them. Because we really need to get the Bradford pears, replaced with something else. I'd much rather have a really strong oak tree in front of my house than a Bradford pear. So, abandoned vehicles, the city code, the way it's currently written, requires all vehicles on someone's property to be registered. So, other places where I've worked, folks have been allowed to have one hobby vehicle. So if you're a motorhead and want to fix up the old MG in the driveway, the city code doesn't really allow that. So that's something we may have that conversation with the council to see if they want to make some change to that, not of an immediate nature, but right now we do have to enforce it the way it's written. Yes.
Being registered is one thing, does that mean it has to be tagged as well?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
because if you're driving down the street, a car with no tags, you don't know if it's registered or not.
It has to have current tags.
But it's, all right.
It has to have current tags.
Hopefully that keeps the 14 cars off the lawns.
Maybe one or two. We just made some changes with the final vote last night to the solid waste ordinance. As you know, the city is going to once a week collection, and we needed to make some changes to make the storage issues and the set out issues more predictable. Before, they didn't really have specific times for when you could set out trash. Now there are more specific times. We will go through and do an education campaign, a postcard campaign before we go into notices of violation, and gentle persuasion is a lot better relationship to build than us just issuing citations and such. The other component of that we've actually started to enforce before don't tell Ross, the council passed it, is being able to give folks the option to buy a toter if they're in violation status. Toter is a trash can on wheels with a hinged lid attached. And my experience, and I've been certified to run solid waste programs for about 20 years, is that if a rental property has the right kind of trash can, and you get them set up with the right kind of trash can, they don't tend to have trash storage violations further on down the road. So if I can get the most prominent landlords in the city to start to use the right kind of containers for single-family homes and stuff that they're renting, we can cut down on some of those problems. And this ordinance gives us an option where those kinds of containers weren't allowed before. So if they get to the point where they're really in enforcement status, I'm going to push them to, I'd rather see them buy those containers than I would collect a $200 fine. So just to be helpful, if I end up fining them, I'll give them the option to buy the containers and I will waive the fine.
Regarding the recycle bins, we have the smaller ones and then we have the larger ones.
Yes.
And of course nowadays, most everything is recyclable.
Right.
The only thing is, the large recycle bins don't have lids.
Right.
I know there was a survey being put out at one point, would you
Right.
rather have them with the lids? And I
And
suggested
what
that the
size?
city could actually make money by selling the lids to help recoup some of the fact that they're giving away the larger bins. Because my name probably has 14 or 15 bins because I pick them up to the neighbors and pass them and give them to them whenever they want them.
The city is, I want to say that the Public Works Director said they had 500 containers of toter nature that have an attached lid, that have been ordered, and they're going to look to start to distribute those in areas of the city. So they'll actually be the same kind of containers that the county is using. I live in Hillsmere. And we have actually toter containers for our recycling. I don't remember the size, but I can email it to Jackie so that she can share it with everybody. Because that'll be a big improvement. Making recycling easy and having the right size container is the first step. And we don't really make any money, it's an avoided cost, you know, but the less we send in the solid waste stream, the better off we are.
So while we're on waste bin design, holes in the bottom of them, would be great, so that they don't capture all the rainwater, without the bin cover, you know, because I have to move my big one down to the
Right.
curb, and it's always interesting,
Right.
because it doesn't have a wheel, doesn't have holes in the bottom. I've tried to drill holes in the bottom, and that's some tough,
Sometimes they're brittle.
some tough plastics.
And I will ask David Gerald, the Public Works Director, about that, because I know he and I discussed it before. It's an option. I don't even think it costs any more for us to order them with holes,
Yeah,
especially when they're using them like downtown collecting wine bottles.
yeah.
They're, you know, try and collect that full of water.
The
it's
newer little
pretty hard.
ones have holes in the bottom, but the bigger, large ones don't.
Don't, yeah, but they could, so. And the last thing I wanted to mention is another ordinance change to our sediment erosion control ordinance. We updated that ordinance so that we were in compliance with the state law. We're one of the only smaller jurisdictions that actually enforces our own sediment erosion control. So when you see other construction sites that have the black silt fence around them and our inspectors working with them, most jurisdictions are actually relying on the county or the state to do it. We added to that ordinance a section of the code that prohibits someone from blowing leaves and grass in the street. So we will go through and do some education this fall in Spanish and English, because there's gonna be a little lag in time for, you know, there's a lot of landscapers that don't speak English, so we're gonna work with folks citywide to try and get the word out. The other part of it that we changed is, believe it or not, illicit discharges were not prohibited in the city. They're only prohibited on state law, but there was no section in the city code for the city to enforce. I caught, the state inspector just happened to be in Eastport and caught a Chinese restaurant pouring his oil down the drain behind the restaurant a number of years ago. And I was glad that he let me know about it, but if it was my inspector that found him, I would have had to call the state. So there wasn't anything actually in our code that prohibited that. So now if I catch anybody who's pouring motor oil down the drain or fry later oil or any of that sort of thing, we have something that we can enforce. So I will stick around till after the chief's done. If everybody's probably always got a property that they're interested in. The other thing that I left for you is a pamphlet that shows you how that you can go onto our track it system and see what your neighbors are doing. Yeah, because we know that everybody wants to know what their neighbors are doing. You can track your neighbors' permits, that sort of thing, and you can follow your own permits if you've applied for one, and you can see if properties are rentals and that sort of thing.
So I just want to put a plug in and a thanks to the city for the reported mechanism that's there. I've used it, I think, 3 times for totally disparate things, unrelated, and I've been really amazed at how fast of a turnaround.
Good.
In fact, the last one that I did, it scared me almost, because I think I put it in at 9:26 one night when I remembered to do it, and before I got out of the shower the next morning, it was already done.
Very good.
So I thought, wow, somebody is really watching
Was
that.
that DNET? That's in my department, I think.
It was painting a curb.
Huh?
It was painting a
I know
curb.
what's enough.
One of the things that Maria didn't tell you about, Alderman for the ward, that she's done since taking over the department is something that was actually prompted by one of our neighbors, and that is, it used to be that the city would issue a citation, and they would issue a citation, and they would issue a citation. There was no real enforcement power there, and Maria and her staff came up with the notion that we need to put more teeth into this enforcement.